On one of the mornings that I was out for one of my morning walks this week, I was listening to a podcast called Intentional Churches. It's a podcast that I listen to from time to time, and it is a podcast for pastors and church leaders and church planters that's kind of coaching on how to just be more effective at the things that you're doing. It's called Intentional Churches because, we want to be a church that's intentional about our reach and connecting with the community and helping people grow in their relationship with Jesus. This particular episode that I listened to this week was a replay of a session from a conference that they had recently held. And the session in the conference was essentially a panel of young people that they had brought to interview in front of a room full of pastors and church leaders. And the unique thing about these four people that they brought onto the stage to interview was that while none of them would have called themselves atheists, none of them professed an authentic faith in God. They all had doubts. They all kind of were sort of pessimistic about God, the Bible, church. They weren't antagonistic, but they were basically saying, I don't know that I believe that there's a God, and I don't know that I believe the Bible. And so in this interview, the purpose of the interview was to give this room full of pastors some insight as to what the people in their community, by and large, think about God and the Bible and church and Jesus. And I found it to be a really fascinating interview just to hear what these young people, these young adults were saying. As I was listening to them, it's interesting because I haven't been a young adult for quite a while, yet a lot of the things that they were saying really resonated with the Bart of 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. A lot of the things that they were saying and the experiences they had were very similar to some of the experiences that I had had. And when I was a kid growing up in church, I've talked about this before, that my family was a church family. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, no questions asked, we were there. I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say that my family was a devout, faith-filled Christian family, but we were a churched family for sure. And so we spent a lot of time at church. And as I think about my childhood experience in church, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it was bad. As a kid, I didn't like church. If there were other options and other things that I could do, I certainly would have chosen other things to do rather than to go to church. But one thing that I do think back on about my church experience is that the people there were good people. The people that we were around were morally upright people. They were authentic in terms of kind of who they were and the way they interacted with my family, and they were good to my family. And so I didn't necessarily have a negative feeling about church. However, I would say this. There was always this undercurrent in my church experience of judgment and judgmentalism that came from what I would say today was legalism in the church. Meaning, there always seemed to be these rules that were not really written down anywhere, that everybody was really supposed to know that you were supposed to follow. And if you didn't follow them, people kind of looked down their nose at you. And maybe it was related to like the way that you dressed, or the length of your hair. Or if you were a girl, it was the amount of makeup that you might have worn. Maybe it was related to the music that you listened to, or the movies that you watched, or the things that you did as hobbies. These weren't necessarily written rules. They certainly weren't from the Bible. I think the intent was that these rules, these unwritten rules, kind of came from what people would have said was biblical teaching, but they weren't really from the Bible. And so the end result was I grew up in church always feeling some level of being judged when I was at church for who I was and what I liked and the things that I did. And as I listened to the stories of these young adults as they were being interviewed in this conference session, I noted a lot of the same experiences that they'd had. Granted, they're much younger than I am, and their experiences are much more recent than what I'm relating to, but it's been pretty consistent. In fact, I wrote down some things that these young adults shared, some actual quotes, and I'm going to bet that most of us have probably experienced the exact same thing. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the quote with you. And if you have ever felt this in a church experience, you can vote by raising your hand, okay? Here's the first one. This is an actual quote. I feel judged when I go to church. Anybody ever felt that? Anyone? Okay, I have. And okay, so that's about half of us in the room here. How about this one? There are too many rules to follow. Anybody ever felt and experienced that in church? No, maybe not. Okay. That was something that I certainly felt, and that's consistent with what these young people, by and large, all of them were sort of saying about their church experience. How about this? I have doubts and questions that don't seem welcome. Okay? Some of us there. I'm not sure I believe all the supernatural stuff. In our Bible study this last Wednesday, all we did was read about the miracles of Jesus. Yeah. And for some people, that's a really, really difficult hurdle to get over, that the Bible is full of all this supernatural stuff, maybe things that we don't see today, and a lot of people might have a struggle with that. How about this? I'm looking for purpose and meaning in life. Anyone looking for purpose and meaning in their life? Yeah? Okay, that one's unanimous. What stuck out to me the most about these interviews was how many of these young people basically cited that their belief about church and the Bible was that it was all about rules and regulations. That's what religion was really all about. It's all about rules and regulations. And it made me realize how we as Christians can sometimes misrepresent what faith in Jesus is really supposed to be all about. We can get so caught up in the do's and the don'ts of what we're supposed to do or what we're not supposed to do, and we forget what is the heart, the root of the gospel, and that is a relationship with a loving God through his son Jesus. And when I talk about the gospel is a broad term, and I was actually in a meeting with people this week who were using the term gospel to describe it as the whole Bible. Well, the word gospel means good news. And Jesus came to bring a gospel, a good news. And the good news that Jesus brought, when we read what he said, is that there's a new kingdom. In fact, the word gospel comes from an old word, euangelion. That's the Greek word, euangelion, which means good news. And historically, anytime a euangelion, a good news, was being proclaimed, it was at the arrival of a new kingdom. So when the Greeks took over the world, they would send messengers out who were delivering a euangelion. The Greek Empire is here. And as they were taking over new cities and new territories, they would declare, euangelion, here's the good news. The Romans did the same thing. As the Romans were conquering the world, they would send messengers out and say, hey, good people, you're about to be taken over by the Romans, but this is good news because these are all the benefits of being a part of the Roman kingdom. Jesus came to declare a euangelion, a good news, which is the arrival of God's kingdom. And he's the king. And that song that we just sang a moment ago that came from the Sermon on the Mount, if you read the Sermon on the Mount on Matthew, it's Jesus describing what the kingdom of God is really like and what those who are citizens of the kingdom of God get to experience. Now, the good news that we declare today is that we all have the ability to become citizens of God's kingdom. We have the right to gain citizenship through our faith in Jesus. We're born separated from God because of our sin nature, and we live our lives separated from God until we believe in and trust Jesus. In John chapter 1, John wrote that those who believe in Jesus, those who receive him, are given the right to be called children of God. And when we become children of God, we become citizens of his kingdom. The closest thing that I can liken this to is that my sons, Silas and Ephraim, were born in Canada, but born as American citizens because they were my sons. Because I'm an American citizen, they attain American citizenship by birth because they are my sons. When we are adopted into God's family by faith and trust in Jesus, we become citizens of this kingdom, and Jesus is the king. That's the good news. That's what we're here to declare. That's what we're here to live out, is this life as citizens in God's kingdom. You might have noticed a theme in our songs this morning that we're focused on the kingdom of God and the King Jesus, because he is the king and we're part of that kingdom. Now, one of the interviewees, her name was Abby, she shared that she grew up going to church, 16, 17 years of her, upbringing. And for her, church was really not much more than a social experience. It was the place that she went to see her godmother and other friends and other relatives. And while it gave her a sense of community and connection, and it also gave her some moral boundaries, it didn't translate into a lasting faith. And today, as a young adult, she would say she doesn't really have a faith in God, even though she grew up attending church. One of the other participants in the interview was a guy named Mark. And Mark said, he remembered going to church as a kid and not liking it very much because the pews were really uncomfortable and he didn't know when he was supposed to stand up or sit down or kneel, and it was all very confusing. And as he got older, he pretty much stopped going except on Christmas and when his mom made him. And it certainly didn't make any long-term impact in his spiritual journey. And some of us have probably had some similar experiences in other churches where you don't really know what the rules in this church experience or this church environment are like. You don't really know what people are expecting of you. You don't know when you're supposed to stand, when you're supposed to sit, what you're supposed to wear. It's kind of a foreign experience. And if we've had those negative experiences like that, it can sometimes taint our journey with Jesus. It can actually it can cause us to put up some barriers about our own openness to faith and the things that God might want to do in our lives. Now today, we're continuing in our study of the New Testament text of Colossians. And just a quick little recap on where we've been. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been in here, and we've been kind of trekking through this for quite a while. Colossians was a letter in our New Testament of our Bible, written to an early church in the first century in a city called Colossae, a group of house churches, about 4 to 6 house churches with about 10 to 20 people in them, maybe 15 to 20 people in each of those house churches. It's not what we picture as a church today when we think, oh, the church in Colossae. It was a group of people that got together in a building in the middle of town. Nope, it was actually more like this, a group of people that gathered in a living room and tried to figure out what it meant to live out their faith. And as I've shared with you, in recapping this every single week, they were having some theological problems. They didn't have the Bible. Since they didn't have the Bible, they didn't really know what it meant to be a disciple or a Christian. They didn't know what the rules were that they were supposed to be following. And Epaphras, who was the man who started the church in Colossae, he was an early disciple of Jesus. He'd heard the Apostle Paul preach in another city. He heard the gospel. He gave his life to Jesus. He goes to his hometown of Colossae, starts leading other people to become disciples of Jesus. And now all of a sudden, they're doing what humans want to do, which is discover the rules. Okay, now we have this new king that we follow, this new God that we worship. What are the rules for following this God? What are the rules for worship? And because we didn't have anything written down at that time, the Bible was just being written, they started making up their own rules, and they're using some of their own previous experiences. Those that were Jewish were bringing their Jewish rules into it. Those that came from a Greco-Roman religious experience were bringing that. There was an emergence of this movement called Gnosticism, which was this intellectual pursuit of knowledge and spirituality, and some of that was being infiltrated into the church. And so you have this mess, this hodgepodge of people who genuinely want to follow Jesus but just don't know what the rules are. So they're making them up. And Epaphras comes to Paul and says, I need some help. This is what we're doing. Direct us. And Paul writes this letter in response to what he hears is going on in the church in Colossae to try to set the record straight with these people about what they claim to believe and how it's supposed to impact their lives and their worship. And so we're going to read Colossians chapter 2, beginning at verse 16. We're going to read 16 to 23. This is exactly where we left off last time. And if everybody's got their Bible turned to that and their device, let's read it together. I'll read. I'm reading from the Christian Standard Bible. It says, "Therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food and drink, or in the matter of a festival, or a new moon, or Sabbath days. These are a shadow of what was to come. The substance is Christ. Let no one condemn you by delighting in ascetic practices and the worship of angels, claiming access to a visionary realm. Such people are inflated by empty notions of their unspiritual minds. They don't hold on to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and held together by its ligaments and tendons, grows with growth from God. If you died with Christ to the elements of this world, why do you live as if you still belonged to the world? Why do you submit to regulations? Don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. All these regulations refer to what is destined to perish by being used up. They are human commands and doctrines. Although those have a reputation for wisdom by promoting self-made religion, false humility, and severe treatment of the body, they are not of any value in curbing self-indulgence. Okay, that's like a mouthful, right? Again, we talked about this before. Paul's like, you can envision him, he's pacing, he's preaching, and Timothy is frantically scribbling to write all this down. Because it's just kind of this hodgepodge of ideas, at least it seems that way on the surface. But I think as we go through and we break this down, we'll see that Paul actually had some intentionality with where he was going and what he was trying to do. Now, the first thing that we need to note is the first word is therefore in this section. And anytime you see the word therefore in Scripture, you need to ask the question, what is it, Scott?
What's it there for?
What's it there for? It's a continuation of the previous thoughts, the previous ideas, which is what we went through the last time we were together. And in the last section that we studied together, Paul was warning the church not to be led astray by human philosophies. There's all these smart ideas coming, but maybe they're not so smart. They sound smart, but there's no substance to them. He says, stay rooted in Jesus. Don't get caught up in these human philosophies. Stay rooted in Jesus. And then he goes on to clarify that you are saved by your faith in Jesus. Jesus has already defeated the enemy and the dark spiritual forces. Okay, that's the nutshell of what we went through the last time we were together. And because of that, he says, therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food and drink or in the matter of festival or a new moon or Sabbath days. These are a shadow of what was to come. The substance is Christ. Now, specifically, what Paul is addressing here are Jewish people in the community who are trying to make people in the church follow the Jewish law. In the previous session, we addressed the Judaizers who were trying to make those who wanted to follow Jesus get circumcised because that's what Jews did. The Judaizers are a group of people who basically said, we love Jesus, we're going to follow Jesus, we believe Jesus is the Messiah, but in order for you to really be saved by Jesus, you also have to become a Jew. And that's what the Judaizers were doing. And there's clearly some Jewish people in this church community in Colossae because Paul is addressing some of this Judaism stuff that's being infiltrated in the church. And so we're talking about the festivals, the new moon, the Sabbath, the dietary laws. He's saying, you don't have to follow those rules. That's not what this is all about. He says that those are just a shadow. The Greek word that he uses for shadow here is the word skia, which it contrasts the word soma in the Bible, which is an actual body with substance. In essence, he's saying, why are you trying to hold on to something that's merely a shadow of something to come? It's not the real deal. In fact, what does Matthew say? Let me go back there. Matthew says in 5:17, he says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Everything in the law was a shadow pointing towards Jesus. And Paul is saying, why are you holding on to the shadow that's pointing to Jesus when you can hold on to Jesus himself? So you don't need to follow the Jewish rules. There's some good in them, but it is not by following those rules that you are saved. You are saved through your faith in Jesus. Let's look at verse 18. He says, let no one condemn you by delighting in ascetic practices in the worship of angels, claiming access to a visionary realm. Such people are inflated by empty notions and unspiritual minds. The Greek word that he uses here for condemn literally means to disqualify you from the prize. You have the opportunity to have the prize. What's the prize? The prize is adoption into God's family. It's to be a citizen of God's kingdom. But if you start believing that it's the rules that you follow that get you into God's kingdom, you're disqualified because it's not. It's Jesus. It's Jesus alone. The warning here that he gives echoes what he writes in Galatians chapter 1, verse 8. It says, even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. In other words, he's saying the ascetic practices that people are saying that you need to follow in order to be saved, is another gospel, and it's not the real gospel. Now, asceticism, let me explain what that actually means. The ascetics were a group of people who believed that they could become more spiritual and more holy basically by punishing themselves. Don't do anything that is enjoyable. Don't eat food that tastes good. You only eat what you have to for survival. Don't do things that give you pleasure. In fact, in the Middle Ages, the group known as the ascetics would go so far as to physically flog their own bodies because they believed that the more they suffered, the holier they became. And that's what's happening in the church here is Paul is saying, don't listen to the ascetics who are saying that you need to deprive yourself of pleasure and that somehow makes you holier. He also addresses again, we saw this in the previous section of text that we studied, the worship of angels. And I clarified in our last session together that worshiping anything that is a created being is heresy. And everywhere in Scripture we see someone worshiping an angel. The angel typically stops them and says, wait, you're going to get us both in trouble. I'm not accepting your worship, and you should be worshiping God alone. We should never worship anything that has been created, only the Creator Himself. Now, in our modern day times, we don't necessarily think about angel worship because it's not something we see a lot. But I have a college classmate who posts stuff on her Facebook feed all the time that when I see it's angel worship. Now, I don't know that she would go so far as to say she worships angels. But she's got this fixation on angels and this angelic world that borders on idolatry. And again, we are not to worship angels. We are not to, even though they are spiritual beings, they are created beings, just like we are created beings. And we should never worship created beings, only the Creator. In verse 19, Paul goes on to talk about these ascetics and the people that are worshiping angels, and he says they don't hold on to the head is Jesus, from whom the whole body, the body being the church, is nourished and held together by its ligaments and tendons. It grows with growth from God. He's saying these people that are chasing after angels and they're following this asceticism and people that are trying to get you to follow the dietary laws of Judaism, they're not holding on to Jesus Christ. The church is the body of Jesus, and we are connected to the head. We are connected to the head, and that's how we get all of our direction, all of our instruction is from Jesus, our head. In John 15:5, Jesus said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. I'm not an expert gardener by any stretch of the imagination, but I do understand when we cut branches off from the vine, those branches die. And although we may claim Jesus as the head, we need to hold on to the head or else we will not bear fruit the way that Jesus has told us that we would. He's the vine, we're the branches, we've got to cling to Him. Verses 20 to 22, Paul says, if you died with Christ to the elements of this world, why do you live as if you still belong to the world? Why do you submit to regulations? Don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. All these regulations refer to what is destined to perish by being used up. They are human commands and doctrines. Again, echoing back to the session that we were studying before, the elements of the world is the base substance of who we are as human beings. We're born with a physical body that is inflicted with a sin nature. And we have died to that sin nature when we give our lives to Jesus Christ. And Paul is saying, you've died to the base elements of this world, the sinful nature that's in you. When you claim Jesus, you're dead to that. Paul writes in one of his other letters that, we died to Christ, or died to our sin, we're alive in Christ. And that's what he's trying to get them to understand here, is that you said no to those things. And then we have this little phrase that he uses here, the don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. What does that actually mean? I think he's actually quoting the ascetics here. The ascetics who are saying you need to deprive yourself of anything that's worldly or good or joyful. Don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. These are their rules. This is their legalism. The ascetics were basically defined by what they did do and what they didn't do. And how often have we looked at the church, especially in our modern days, and people look at the church and they know the church by what the church is for or what the church is against, more so what the church is against than what it's for. And it's just legalism at its best. There's a commentary writer, a theologian that I look to a lot when I'm doing my preparation and my study for my teaching. His name's Warren Wiersbe. And he writes that there is a place in our lives for abstinence when it comes to don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. Proper care for our bodies is a good thing. There are some things that are just not as healthy for us as other things. But the ascetic hopes to sanctify their soul by way of discipline in the body. And that's heresy. They believe that by following those rules, it somehow makes them holier than others. You know, we have freedom in Jesus Christ, and this is one of the beautiful things about being a part of God's kingdom, is that there are a lot of things that we could choose to do. It doesn't mean that we should do everything. We shouldn't smoke everything. We probably don't need to drink everything. We probably ought to create some boundaries in our lives. Just because we can do it doesn't mean that we should. But it doesn't mean that we do those things to define our relationship. There are some rules that we probably follow because of our relationship with Jesus. I'll use this as an example. I am married to Elizabeth. Because I am married to her, one of the rules that I have is that I don't engage in inappropriate behavior with other women that are not my wife. I don't kiss any other girls. I'll just put it that way. Now, it's not the fact that I don't kiss other women that defines my relationship with her. It's the respect that I have for the relationship that causes me to follow that rule. Elizabeth is married to me. And because she is married to me, she has a rule. She does not withdraw money from our savings account without talking to me about it first. It's not that the rule defines our relationship. It's not that the rule says that she loves me more because she does or she doesn't, but it's because of the respect that she has for our relationship that she follows the rule. And it's the same with the rules that we create for ourselves in our relationship with Jesus. Maybe there is some music that we probably shouldn't listen to, or some movies we shouldn't watch, or some TV shows we shouldn't watch. We mentioned a few earlier today that maybe are not as wholesome for us as they should be. Maybe there's some people that we shouldn't hang around with that God's brought into our lives. There probably are some things that we ought to do, but it's not those things that define our holiness or that make us right with God. We don't do those things out of reverence for Jesus and out of our love for him. And that's what Paul is trying to get to here, is that these things don't sanctify you. They don't make you holier. Following these rules don't make you holier. But maybe you choose to do them because of your respect for your relationship with Jesus. Verse 23, last verse, it says, although these have a reputation, he's talking about the people here, they have a reputation for wisdom by promoting self-made religion, false humility, and severe treatment of the body, they are not of any value in curbing self-indulgence. Paul notes here that the rules seem spiritual. It seems like following these rules might do something good for you, but in the end, it doesn't really do anything for you. In fact, if we look at Matthew chapter 23, verse 27, Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, the most religious of all people in his days. And he says, you are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. He says, you follow all the rules, and so on the outside you look awesome. But on the inside, you're broken and you're messy, you're dirty, you're rotting on the inside. The word that Paul uses to describe these practices is the word disposable. The best way that I can think of explaining this to you is we had a cake break just a few minutes ago, and you ate cake with a disposable fork on a disposable plate. And most of us wiped our mouth with a disposable napkin. And all of those plates, all of them now, I'm looking around the room, I don't see any of them. All of the plates, all of the forks, all of the napkins made their way into the garbage can. It would be like you deciding that after you ate the cake off of that plate and that fork, that you were going to keep eating off of that plate and that fork for the rest of the year because you got it at church. And therefore, by eating off of this plate and with this fork, it's somehow going to make you holier and closer to God because it's a church fork and a church plate. When in all actuality, it's just a disposable means by which you enjoyed something that someone baked for you. Holding on to these religious practices that were infiltrating their way into the church, following the checklist, following the rules, is like tying yourself to something that's disposable and expecting it to do something for you spiritually. It won't. Warren Wiersbe says, sometimes you need to abstain from food or drink to be a healthier person or to keep from hurting a weaker Christian. We know that. Sometimes we just need to abstain from things because it might lead somebody else down a path that isn't good for them. Okay, do that when it seems appropriate to you. But to do so with the belief that it makes you better or holier or more spiritual than someone else is flat out wrong. Just as Jesus talked about the Pharisees being clean on the outside and dirty on the inside, following the rules, it gives the impression that you have some high level of spirituality, but the product doesn't live up to the promotion. When you really start to dig in, you realize that there are some holes in the system. Now, so what does all of this mean for us today? We're reading what Paul is writing to the Colossians some 2,000 years ago and how it's addressing the specific questions that they might have or the things that they're wrestling with. And, while we in this room may not necessarily have completely agreed with the experiences of the young people from those interviews that I shared with you earlier, I think Paul addresses those. And we all certainly know people in our lives who maybe have had some of those experiences. And let's see how Paul would have addressed these concerns or these questions that people had. The first one, I feel judged when I go to church. The first thing that Paul says is don't let anyone judge you. If you feel judged going to church, as Bob Newhart would say, stop it. Don't feel judged. Don't let anyone judge you. We're given grace. If you're in a church environment in which you feel judged, you probably need to try a different church environment. Second thing, there are too many rules to follow. Paul asks, why do you submit to regulations? The essence of Christianity is not about rule following, but it's about a relationship with Jesus. I have doubts and questions that don't seem welcome. I think Paul would say, it's okay. It's okay to have questions and doubts. Paul encourages critical thinking. He warns against those who are inflated by somehow seeming to know everything. In fact, if you're ever in a church environment where the person who's in leadership or the people in leadership seem to have the answer for everything, you probably ought to run. I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of stuff I don't know and I don't understand. And I hope that makes you trust me more than to doubt my competence and my level of intellect. Anybody who has an answer for everything is probably a dangerous person and something you ought to be very wary of. Next thought, I'm not sure I believe all the supernatural stuff. I think Paul would say, focus on the practical impact of faith, growth, nourishment, connection, being connected to the body, being connected to the head. You don't have to believe that Jesus really turned water into wine to be a follower of Jesus. I don't know why it would be in the Bible if it wasn't actually true, but you don't have to believe that. You don't have to believe that Jesus actually physically walked on water. Maybe there is some scientific explanation for it. You don't have to believe that it was a miracle. Now, again, I don't know why it would be in the Bible if it wasn't true. Written by multiple authors of the Bible. I don't know why it would be in the Bible if it wasn't true, but you don't have to believe that. The only real supernatural stuff that you 100%, without a doubt, have to believe in order to be a disciple of Jesus is that he rose from the dead. Otherwise, you're putting your faith and your trust in a dead man, and I don't know why you would put your faith and trust in Jesus as a dead man. There are plenty of other dead people that you could follow if you want to follow a dead person. Now, I believe personally that there's a lot of evidence that supports a lot of the supernatural stuff in the Bible, but I would never say that that's a place that we have to start. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to wrestle through with these things. And finally, I'm looking for purpose and meaning in life. I think Paul would say that true faith offers purpose and fulfillment, not through following rules, but through a genuine relationship with Jesus. Our purpose statement as a church, Bear Creek Community Church exists, or we're attempting to exist, to help people experience a full and meaningful life through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I built this purpose statement right after what Jesus says in John chapter 10, verse 10. He says, the enemy comes to steal and kill and destroy. I've come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. That full and meaningful life that we all want to experience is the abundant life that Jesus offers. Jesus didn't come to start a religion. He didn't come and say, follow all these rules and you'll be okay. He came and he said, follow me and you'll be okay. Rewinding all the way back to the very first lesson as we started Colossians, I pointed out that Paul doesn't talk about the teachings of Jesus. Paul doesn't declare that the teachings of Jesus are superior and supreme. He claims that the person of Jesus is superior and supreme. He is the object of our affection. He's the center of our lives and of our faith life. It's all about the personal relationship, not about the rules we follow. Doesn't mean that there aren't some rules. But when we make the rules be the thing that sanctify us and make us right with God, we're putting the cart before the horse. We need to understand that it's relationship first. So here's my challenge for you for this week. I think we all do this to some degree. I know that I do. But I would challenge you to take a piece of paper, take a notepad, take something out, and just spend some time reflecting this week on things that you might have inadvertently decided are rules that you have to follow in order to be deemed a good Christian. What are the rules that you think you have to follow to be deemed a good Christian? Is it, I have to go to church on Sunday? Or I have to read my Bible every day? Or I have to listen to Christian music? Or I have to not do this, or I have to do that, whatever those things are. And make that list, and then spend some time actually praying over that list and let the Holy Spirit convict you in the areas that, well, should I be investing time and energy in these things or not? But more importantly, have I put following these rules above my relationship with Jesus? Do I truly understand that these things I do because of my love for him, not because I think that this is what makes him happy with me? There's a tension in that, and I wrestle with it every single day. I want Jesus to be happy with me. But I know that even if I don't follow all the rules I've made for myself, Jesus is still happy with me. And I have to remind myself of that constantly, that it's not about the rules I follow. Because what happens when I create rules for myself to follow? You know what I do by nature? I expect you to follow the same rules. That's what human beings do. That's what was happening in this first century church, is I came with these beliefs and these ideals. These are the rules that I think I have to follow, and therefore, since they're the rules I think I have to follow, they're the rules that I think you also ought to have to follow. And that's where legalism comes from. And so when we start thinking about the church and its reputation of legalism and the unwritten rules on the wall that people have to follow, that's really where it comes from. It comes most of the time from a very pure start. My intentions were good, but those good intentions can grow into something that's very unhealthy and very negative. And just like that, we're in chapter 3 of Colossians. Just like that. It just felt just like that, didn't it?